images of Australia and Australians. The faces of our people. Faces that tell us who we are. At the start of our century, these were faces that turned to England. Proud members of an empire we thought would last forever. The wide-eyed faces that went to war, to faraway places with strange-sounding names like Gallipoli and Pozieres. The newcomers who showed us just what we'd been missing. We loved the bushies who took on our big brown land. Those that showed us how far we could go. And those who kept going against unbackable odds. As we near the end of our journey across our century, it's time for Australians to stand up and take a bow. This is Sydney's Centennial Park, and this is the place, the exact spot, where on the 1st of January 1901, in a burst of pomp and circumstance, we went from being a bunch of British colonies to being a nation, Australia. But who's an Australian? Are we the legendary diggers, or the bushies and the battlers that Banjo Patterson wrote about? Or those sporting heroes whom we love to cheer? And what's an Aussie look like? Where does she live? And how does he speak?
Fellow Australians, I'm awfully glad to be back again in my own country after quite a long and quite an exciting trip abroad. And I was very glad indeed to have such a marvellous welcome from all the machines that came out to meet the boat this morning.
Now, the way we speak sets us apart from everybody else.
It's the Australian fair go instinct coming out. That's what it is.
All I know is what comes from here inside. And by talking to the people out there in mainstream Australia and their fears also.
Some historians say that the good old nasal twang is part Cockney and part convict Irish. Some wags even blame it on the blowfly. One theory is that we were forced to speak through clenched teeth to keep the blowies out.
I couldn't live in the city, and I dare say that most city blokes couldn't live out here.
I think I probably went through the most dangerous period of motor racing that there's ever been.
Did you enjoy your cricket, Sir Donald?
I don't think that anyone can be a good cricketer if they don't enjoy their cricket.
But of course, we don't all speak like that.
I thought I might as well, as it were, give it a go.
The cultured, some would say bunged-on accent is also Australian.
Which Mr. Whittam woke up one morning finding the decision had been made and finding that he'd been caught with his pants well and truly down.
Even the words we spoke said a lot about how we felt about ourselves as a nation.
All I need say is that Australia is British.
In the middle of our century, it wasn't enough for Australia to call itself British. Some wanted to sound like My Fair Lady.
Hello, Pat.
Hello, Ronnie. I wasn't going to stop, but seeing that we're here, I'm sure you'll be delighted to hear that I'm taking Ronald to England for the London season tomorrow. Goodbye. Ride on, Ronald, please.
For every Aussie who put on the airs and graces, there were a dozen ready to take the mickey out of them.
Ride on, Ronald, please. If anybody thinks she was the last of the Duchesses.
Clearly, some Australians were a bit embarrassed about how we appeared to the world. Back in 1938, when we celebrated our 150th birthday, the official government film presented this family as typically Australian.
Hey, Mother, I bet Governor Phillip never had a cake like this.
No, my dear, it was a very different sort of cake that he had to share with his early settlers, wasn't it, Father?
A nasty cake. Iced with plenty of trouble and every slice a bitter problem.
By the time the Queen arrived, for the first visit by a reigning monarch in 1954, we were still trying to keep up with the Windsors. But this time, more of the real us came through.
Loyal and dutiful subjects desire to offer to your Majesty and His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, our most sincere and affectionate welcome.
The fact is, the way most of us really speak hasn't changed much over our century.
Oh, gosh, you don't have to be asked. Just plain. Come on. Far out. That's unreal. Untold. That's top. Febo.
Special cheerio to you, Gran, and to all in South Australia. Abyssinia, I'll say we are.
Abyssinia, I'll be seeing you. We love mucking about with the language that Mother England had given us.
There was a fellow with an emu. With a what? An emu. An emu? An emu. Or a rice book of the dinner. Oh, you mean a menu? Menu, yeah. A menu. Oh, you little beauty. Human beings at last.
Rhyming slang and ocarisms have always been a national pastime. We've even created our own lingo.
Oh, am I glad to be shot of those poppy drongos. Have a buster! Well, beauty.
I got a toothache.
Australians used slang because it was like belonging to a club, and only other Aussies could understand you. Well, that's the theory.
He must have been crook. Crook? Yeah, you know, a Latin word meaning oncus.
Oscar.
Snide.
Snide? I don't understand them foreign languages. But a body can be respectable without high education.
Oh, too right they can.
Well,
It sounds like a foreign language today, because slang, like most things, goes in and out of fashion. And sometimes it was imported, usually from America.
It's hot ticket, also boss, gas, gnusky, and squeep.
And here's the latest, George.
Quakey is the new in-word for gas and fad. Whatever happened to plain good?
She said, I haven't got my coffee, Oscar.
Now, anyone called ostentatious would have to be a linguistic leer.
Well, just then Laura comes out of the kitchen with a few drinks for everybody. Fair dinkum, you've never seen a cooler barmaid. I grabbed a beer and said, thanks, Laura, ta.
Slang and wordplay have given Australia one of the richest languages in the world, and we've used it to keep each other honest.
Don't come the raw prawn with me, sport. I'll show you what you can do with the rough end of a pineapple.
Now, even though there's a local lingo to describe everything,
This is it.
there's one simple word that says more about being Australian than all the others put together.
Where you been? I have to pick up your new mate. How you going, mate, all right?
Yeah, mate, how you going, all right?
All right, mate. Nino, this is Pat. Pat, Nino.
Pleased to meet you.
How do you do?
All right, mate.
According to folklore, to be a real Aussie, you had to be strong as a mallee bull, tough as Jarrah, and have a sense of humour as dry as the Tanami Desert.
Oh, so you drunk Borax all your life?
No. Not yet.
The bushy is an icon that's in our hearts.
Hurrah for the old stock saddle boys, and hurrah for the stock whip too. Hurrah for the baldy pony that will carry me westward home. Will carry me westward home, me boys, that's where the cattle stray. On the far buck too, where the eat are 1,000 miles away.
Now, we call them typical Aussies, but they weren't really. The truth is, even at the turn of our century, the bush was a place where most Australians didn't live.
We turned overseas, me boys, in shipments every day. From the far buck too and the Flinders too, 1,000 miles away.
In 1900, almost half of Australia's 4 million people lived in the capital cities. Another million lived in the growing towns. We were already a land of city slickers. But the bushy of folklore became an icon for good reason. Our brutal, dry landscape could only be tamed by a certain kind of character. To survive, you had to make do, and you had to be willing to have a go.
So if your horse is fine, across the Alps and fine, we'll flag our whips like thunderbolts, don't care what trumpets say. And run it and we'll bring home the cattle that now roam on a farm or two and the blinders too, 1,000 miles away.
Now these were qualities that all Australians admired, but it was more than that. The country depended on it.
So we step out to meet the producers who sow the seeds of Australia's prosperity.
I'm sure about a bogey.
It was accepted that farmers were the backbone of the country, and we rode on the sheep's back.
But before the shearing was over, I wished myself back again. A shearing for old Tom Patterson on the 1-3 plain. Hey, all among the wool, boys, all among the wool.
For half of last century, and the best part of this one, wool and wheat reigned supreme as our main exports. But in the 1920s, the sort of life our bushies were leading started to change. Machines started to replace muscle as the way to conquer this rugged land.
Tractors and bulldozers, the draft horses of today, are used in 100 different ways.
As the century ran out, the gap widened between ordinary Australians and the bushy of Henry Lawson's folk songs. Today, almost 90% of Australians live in a town or a city. We are one of the most urbanised people on earth. But we hang on to the myths and the mystique. We like to think that we all possess their self-reliance, their irreverence, and their knockabout character. This is how we see ourselves. Part Crocodile Dundee, part Mel Gibson. In 1914, the young men of Australia rode off to war and rode into our legends. Although we'd taken our first uneasy steps as a nation, we were still a bit wobbly. These volunteer boy soldiers had to prove that we could strut our stuff on the world stage. They carried the expectations of every Aussie on their youthful shoulders. But you'd never know it from these pictures. Like the bushies before them, these 6-bob-a-day tourists, as they were called, were strong and silent, never trusting anyone in authority. Instead, our diggers learnt to rely on the blokes right next to them, on their mates. They proved that Australia could stand on its own 2 feet. All our troops were volunteers, a boast no other country could make. And we now had our place at the world table. So when the diggers came home, the country proudly put them up on a pedestal. As for these bronzed Anzacs, well, they look like they belong to a sun-drenched country, a place where most people lived within 50 kilometres of the coast.
Organised life saving has developed a spectacle that is as purely Australian as the kangaroo or the koala bear.
The newsreels were quick to point out the similarities. They were all lifesavers.
Voluntary lifesavers, voluntary fighters. The amateur surf clubs have an enlistment record second to none.
Like the soldiers, lifesavers volunteered to put their bodies on the line.
No surf is too rough for them, no riptide too dangerous, no risk too great if there's a life to be saved.
Now, if you look, there's something missing from the way we see ourselves.
Hey, that reel isn't a towel rack, miss. Oh, well, it's all in a day's work.
In spite of the work women have done, in the bush and beyond, Australia has a very blokey image. When it came to legend building, the boys pushed the girls right out of the picture. And it wasn't just the girls who missed out. Australia should be proud of its many cultures. And of having the oldest culture in the world. Yet even in this new Australia, we worship the bushies, the diggers and the lifesavers. Maybe we like to think that there's a bit of them in all of us.
We are one, but we are many, and from all the lands on earth we come. We share a dream and sing with one voice. I am, you are, we are Australia.
Throughout this series, we've given you a taste of what Australians like to do and how we've tried to do it in our century. The moments and the memories. Your first kiss, your first car, the days of the dunny man. And maybe the best memory of the lot, those days when you could leave the milk money on the front porch and nobody would pinch it. Now that was Australian. And who would be Australian of our century? Well, maybe not one person, but two people, a man and a woman. A husband and a wife, just like those millions of others who've built a family at the same time who've built a country in our century. If you could find a couple that represented those people who've brought us to where we are today, then we thought that their story would go something like this. It's January 1, 1900, and our typical Aussie, Bill, is born on a farm. Mary is born exactly a year later, in 1901, the same day that our 6 colonies form the new nation of Australia. In 1917, Bill lies about his age and enlists for the First World War. He sees the horrors of the trenches in France, but somehow he survives. Bill and Mary meet at a welcome home parade, and they're married 6 months later. Thanks to the soldier settlement scheme, they start up on a small wheat farm. In 1919, Bill nearly dies from the Spanish flu. The killer bug kills more than 10,000 Australians and close to 40 million worldwide. In 1923, John arrives, the first of 4 kids that come all too quickly. Bill and Mary struggle on, but the farm goes bust in the Great Depression, and they move to the city. In 1940, the world is at war once again, and Bill fibs about his age again too. Only this time, he puts it down. Mary, like so many other mums, supports the family by working in a munitions factory. After serving in Africa, Bill fights in Singapore and is captured by the Japanese. He's a POW for the rest of the war. And worse is to come. In 1942, the eldest son, John, is killed on the Kokoda track. But happiness gradually returns in the post-war years. Their eldest daughter, Margaret, is married in 1946. 2 years later, along comes Peter. The little baby boomer is the first of 12 grandchildren. And Bill's business is also booming. The same year he buys a new Holden. Proud Aussies, our typical family turns out in 1956 to cheer the green and gold at the Melbourne Olympics. Come the 60s, grandson Peter causes a family fuss when he's arrested in protests over the Vietnam War. But the smiles return in 1972. with the arrival of Susan, Bill and Mary's first great-grandchild. 1983 is a tragic year. 2 grandkids lose their homes during the Ash Wednesday bushfires. At the end of the century, Bill and Mary hope to live long enough to see if Australia becomes a republic.
If you've enjoyed our century, be sure to get a copy of the soundtrack CDs featuring music from the series, available at all good record stores.
Greetings to Tasmania. How about sending us over a cargo or 2 of apples? We've forgotten what they're like. Mmm.